I've seen some discussion on some of the Masters Track and Field Facebook groups about a lack of participation in the sport, and I thought I'd add some ideas on why this may be the case and how to address this. Now, I recall a couple years ago in my age group, 55 to 59, in 100 meters, there were 6 participants. This year there were 3, and again, it's just one event, one age group, one state. But in the case of the state of Florida, there's actually over 700,000 men in my age group that theoretically could have participated. But even though we wouldn't want to have that many heats, there are some reasons why there's a lack of participation, and we'll discuss that. Okay, the first reason why there's a lack of participation in Masters Track is basically there's a biomechanical toll to these sort of activities. So as we age, particularly if you're not engaged on a regular activity in those kind of explosive, power type activities, there's a tendency for your type 2 muscle fiber size to decline. Also, doing these sort of activities can result in acute injuries, and it can take a while to recover from those. There is extreme joint stress when doing plyometric work or max velocity, acceleration, things of that nature. So individuals who have gone many years without doing that sort of activity rightly have a reason to be a little apprehensive about doing, jumping into those sort of activities right away. Another factor influencing lack of participation is basically infrastructure. So in my case, I don't have easy access to a track near where I live. That is the case in many parts of the country. And then certainly if you're interested in doing field events of any sort, high school tracks are largely off limits, or in the unique cases where they are available, there's very specific locations and times and days when they may be available, and so that in itself, commuting or the hours of work just may not be convenient for someone who actually wants to train. So the adults may migrate to other activities rather than track and field for that reason. Another factor affecting participation is the psychology of performance decline. So, it is natural as we get older to lose type 2 muscle fiber, to not have as much explosive power as we did when we were younger. And so, athletes who may have done track in high school or college, if they've lost quite a bit of speed, put on a little bit of weight, those sort of things, the psychology of running a lot slower than they did when they were younger can affect an individual a little bit more versus, say, an activity like tennis or pickleball, where that performance decline is not as notable because there are other factors involved in those sports. Another factor affecting participation would be just technique. So, a lot of adults, were not necessarily active in track and field in high school. So, learning technical events such as, the penultimate step of the long jump, or the Fosbury flop in the high jump, or even the block exit as an adult can be a bit more challenging than if it's something you did in high school or college and you just haven't done it in a number of years and just kind of relearning it. But kind of that idea of an old dog has a difficult time learning new tricks does apply for track and field. Another factor affecting participation is kind of the social aspect of just the obvious nature of performance differential. So in distance running, 10K races and so forth, you're in large groups where you can kind of hide in the group, and the fact that you're not as fast as the first runners is not as noticeable, I guess, because there's so many runners. But in a 200-meter race, you could be well behind the first runners, and it becomes more obvious that, hey, I'm not as fast as some of these other runners. Another factor affecting participation is just maybe some of the complexity, particularly, say, with the field events, some of the terminology. Now, I've tried on this channel to explain a lot of concepts and ideas, training methods, and so forth, to give individuals who have an interest in Masters Track, particularly in the sprint events, some exposure to those terms and concepts. But it could be intimidating for individuals, like I said, learning about acceleration, max velocity, and block exit, and so just a variety of terms, stress shortening cycle, and so forth, that they may not be familiar with. Yeah, another factor affecting participation could be that a lot of people are interested in developing their VO2 max, so they migrate towards distance running or cycling, and in sprint training is not known as much so for developing VO2 max. And you can, with HIIT sessions, with short rest periods, fartleks and things like that. But generally, if you're training for speed, VO2 max is not your focus. Another factor affecting participation is just kind of a general lack of marketing or even knowledge that the sport exists. I was one of those individuals who, until 2013 was not involved. I certainly was a fan of the sport, but did not know that Masters Track even existed. And so I discovered it and had a place I could train. And so I started participating. But I think generally speaking, a lot of people do not even know that it exists. Like where I live here in West Palm, there are 5 run clubs, but they're all focused on distance, not one sprint club. But I'm not sure there's really much interest in it. So now, I'm not sure how much of a factor this is, but I will at least kind of re-emphasize the benefits of sprint training because maybe that's a minor factor. So again, some of the benefits of sprint training in general are an improvement in insulin sensitivity, an improvement in bone density, improvement in mobility as well as coordination, improvement in hormone production such as testosterone and growth hormone, an improvement in reaction time, improvement in metabolism, kind of that epic excess post-oxygen consumption effect. And then lastly, sprint training versus distance running, you have far fewer ground contacts in a typical training session. And as well, I'm training on grass, but even a track, kind of a rubber track would be a much softer surface on your joints than, people who are running 5 miles on concrete, and the number of ground contacts on a 5-mile session on concrete versus, doing maybe 600 meters of sprint work on grass or a rubber surface, profound difference. So what are some things we can do to improve participation? Well, one, we can recruit from other sports. So you've got, your CrossFit, your High Rocks, kind of your local run clubs. Interest might be relatively low, but there may be some individuals in those groups that would have some interest in participating in sprint events or Masters Track and Field events. Another thing would be emphasizing that there's age group participation. Heats are based on qualifying times. You're not going to be, as a 50-something-year-old, you're not going to be competing with 25-year-olds in your same heat. And then there are what are called, age grade factors that you can kind of compare yourself again over time. Even if you're not necessarily getting faster or maybe even declining, you're still able to kind of compare your age grade factor in different events. The perception that sprinting is dangerous. Now, it can be risky if you jump into max velocity sprinting too quickly, but if you approach it with a kind of a gradual progression over time, I went from being learning how to walk again in 2022 to doing walks, longer walks, and then stride outs and so forth, and got back into max velocity sprinting eventually over time. So it is possible. Obviously there's a wide spectrum between walking and max velocity sprinting, and you don't have to do max velocity sprinting to be involved in sprint training. Now, another thing would be to kind of consider, maybe activities such as like a standing long jump or short approach jumps, rather than just having these long run-ins, which are a bit more risky on joints. And so that's what I did in this last competition. I just did a 5-step approach, and that was it. And that's probably going to be my last long jump for a while. But anyway, and we do need to recognize the fact that there is an obesity epidemic in the U.S. For older adults, say like over 40, I believe the percentage is like 40% of Americans are obese. So that is kind of a health issue in this country. I'm not sure how to address that, but certainly sprint training or Masters Track and Field in general is a healthy activity as long as it's approached kind of with, like I said, with that gradual progression type approach, rather than just jumping into high explosive type events right off without having any exposure previously to those activities. So hopefully that's some ideas. Welcome your thoughts. Till next video.